find a diamond by scratching on the surface. You'll never find a pearl if you wait out on the shore. That's the way it is when you're looking for the answers. Wisdom lies deep, wisdom lies in the search. Look a little deeper, go a little further, search a little harder. Don't you know you've got to grow? You know you've got to grow. You know you've got to grow. You've got to grow.
Hi there. Welcome to Probe. In this season of Probe, we have been looking at some difficult questions. In today's episode, we are going to look at some so-called inconsistencies of the Bible. Did you hear that right? Baffle us in the Bible? Are there any contradictions in the Bible? Is that possible? We need to do some research to clear up the alleged contradictions. Without wasting any time, let's get into the discussion of Dr. Nirmala Abraham with Reverend Sudhakar.
Once again, a very warm and hearty welcome to you, Reverend Sudhakar. We are so happy that you are with us today.
Thank you, and nice to be with you too, sister.
Thank you. Today is a very special day because today is the day when we are going to look at some of the inconsistencies in the Bible or some of the apparent contradictions that baffle us.
Okay.
Now, you might say, baffle us in the Bible? Well, let us see whether they are really bafflers or contradictions or whether it is just a lack of understanding on our part. But before I go into the questions, I must share with you what I found on the internet. There was a quiz which was given to young children from the Bible. So these are the questions and the answers. Who was Noah's wife? Noah's wife was called Joan of Arc. And what was the first commandment? The first commandment was when Eve told Adam to eat the apple. What was the name of the promised land? Canada. And what was the greatest miracle in the Bible? And one smart person wrote, the greatest miracle in the Bible was when Joshua told his son to stand still and he obeyed. The most standard and common question that anybody puts to you, and many people have asked me personally, is who was Cain's wife in the book of Genesis?
Well, I think the way you began indicates the level of biblical illiteracy
Yes,
that
absolutely.
exists in this world, not
Absolutely.
just in the general world, but even among Christians.
Yes.
And so keeping that in view, I would like to, at the very outset, encourage Christians to read the Bible.
Yes.
I have known people, or at least of people, who have read the Bible at least 100 times from Genesis to Revelation. And I have personally made it a discipline to read through the Bible from Genesis to Revelation at least once every year.
So you're telling us that we should read it continuously from cover to cover and not just the lucky dip kind of reading of the Bible, just one verse and then
Absolutely.
obey that.
That will reduce us into calendar Christians.
Yes.
Or thumbing Christians who will
Right.
thumb their way through the scriptures.
Yes.
And sometimes that will land us in difficulties.
Right.
But if we read the whole Bible, then we can handle these bafflers without being really baffled.
Right. So to come back to Cain, who was Cain's wife? Tell us.
Well, that's what I'm coming to.
Somebody asked me once this question. I said she was Mrs. Cain.
Brilliant. And when somebody asked another leading Christian, he first, on a lighter note, responded this way: why are you worried about somebody else's wife?
Yes, that's right.
But now, seriously, many skeptics and atheists and critics of the Bible, they think there is a problem there. Mainly
Because they think that Adam and Eve had only two sons, Cain and Abel, and where did the wife come from?
Not everybody is mentioned in the Bible.
Right.
Number of chapters are given for Abraham. For some others, just few verses are given. And in the case of some others, it's just their name that is mentioned.
Right.
And many names are not mentioned.
Yes.
For example, if you read Genesis chapter 5, verse 4, it says, Adam and Eve had many sons and daughters.
Yes. So obviously people have not read that verse.
That verse.
So probably he married one of his sisters.
Or one of the descendants of Adam and Eve. And at
So
that
would that
time,
be called incest?
very good. I knew you would raise this question because many raised this
Yes.
when I said this.
Right.
Well, incest becomes sinful and gets declared as sinful much later. At this stage, incest was not even called incest and not even called sin.
Is there any scientific reason for that?
Yes, there is. The fall had just occurred, and the effects of fall, including the genetic disorders,
Yes.
will actually get multiplied and accumulated down the line.
Right.
And it's at that stage that it becomes a problem for us to marry close relatives.
Yes.
Incest becomes problematic,
Right.
genetically speaking.
Because the children can have problems
Yeah.
genetically.
That's right, because the genetic deformities would have got accumulated.
Right.
But until then, God knew that it was fine for them to marry
Yes.
from, within close family members.
Right.
Now, there's a time gap of 130 years, as you can read actually right there in chapter 5 of Genesis, between Adam and Eve's creation and Abel's murder by Cain.
Yes.
And 130 years is a long period, given the high and prolific rate of reproduction
Right.
that was there at that time.
Yes.
Experts in the science that deals with populations and population growths tell us there must have been anything between 936 to 1500 people, all descendants from Adam and Eve.
Yes.
When he was exiled from the community, he left probably with his wife and children. So there's absolutely no contradiction,
Right.
no problem.
Okay. Now let me bring to you the second question.
Uh-huh.
According to 2 Samuel chapter 24 verse 1, it says that God made David take the census of his people. Whereas in 1 Chronicles 21:1 it says
Yeah.
that it was Satan who did that. Now which one is correct? Was it God or was it Satan?
Well, there's at least two ways in which we can handle this.
Yes.
There's a parallel case in the book of Exodus. If you read the book of Exodus, you find two phrases that occur
Yes.
close to equal number of times.
Right.
One phrase is that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. And the other is Pharaoh hardened his heart.
Yes.
And many people ask, is it Pharaoh who hardened his heart or God who hardened Pharaoh's heart?
Yes.
As if these two are contradictory.
Right.
But it's not. Actually, God who knows everything, God who foreknows, all right, he knew that Pharaoh had hardened his heart.
Yes.
And he knew that Pharaoh would not yield until his power was
Yes.
demonstrated.
Right.
And so, knowing that Pharaoh had already hardened his heart, God also hardened Pharaoh's heart, conforming his own choice.
God allowed him to do that.
When we disobey God, we are actually hardening ourselves
Yes.
and taking that hard heart stance of disobeying God.
Right. And God being
God
a
says-
gentleman, he doesn't force you to do something.
He honors our freedom because of his love.
Yes.
So he
That's
doesn't
why
force us.
it says in 2 Samuel 24:1, and
Uh-huh.
again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, Go, number Israel and Judah. Whereas in First Chronicles 21:1 it says, and Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. So God already knew that David was inclined towards this.
That's right.
So God allowed him to, okay, you do what you
You
like.
are decided.
Yes.
Bent upon doing it. So go ahead and do it. But there's also another way in which we can actually answer this. And that is by looking at the Hebrew closely. If you read the NASB translation of the same,
Yes.
it reflects the Hebrew more closely than NIV or other versions.
Okay.
NASB says, now again, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and it incited David against them to say, go, number Israel and Judah. The it here is actually opposed to he with a capital H.
Yes.
That refers to the Lord. It actually means the anger of the Lord incited David here according to the text as opposed to God.
Right.
And Numbers 22:22, Jude 2:14, 20, along with many other verses, talk about Lord's burning anger resulting in adversary.
Yes.
So, to paraphrase 2 Samuel 2:41, the enemy brought on by the Lord's anger incited David. You understand?
Yes.
That word adversary in Hebrew is Satan. And Satan actually gets his proper name from that Hebrew word Satan,
The adversary.
which means adversary. And generally, if it is used to refer to Satan, there's a definite article.
Okay.
That is how we distinguish between an ordinary adversary like a human being or somebody and our ultimate adversary, the Satan, devil. So the definite article is missing, therefore translating it as Satan is not correct.
Right.
We should simply translate it as adversary.
Yes.
It could be a human adversary because Israel had many such people. Some came as spies and cheated them.
So it's adversary and not necessarily Satan.
Satan.
The next question is, Matthew 28 verse 2 says that the angel of the Lord descended from heaven. This is about the resurrection of Jesus.
Yes.
You know, on the day of resurrection, Matthew mentions the angel of the Lord. John 20:11 to 12 tells us that Mary saw two angels
That's right.
sitting on the tomb.
Okay.
How many angels were there? One or two?
That's great. Good question. The Gospels are written on the basis of eyewitness accounts.
Right.
And there is a branch of study in psychology called the psychology of witnesses
Yes.
and the psychology of witnessing. According to that discipline, when the things are very dramatic, the adrenaline levels are very high.
Right.
And you don't expect everybody to, in a relaxed way, observe every detail
Yes.
and give you exactly the same description of what has happened.
They'll see certain facts and that's the only thing they relate.
They relate to and they report. And imagine their situation. Their master was crucified brutally in public. He died.
Right.
He was buried. They were fear gripped and fear stricken. So many of them were behind locked doors. And then some of them dared to come to the tomb and see if the body was still there, so that they might actually pay their respects by perfuming or whatever.
Yes.
So in that situation, do you expect people to be like a scientist who goes with his instruments and pitches his tent and observes every detail in a relaxed way?
Was it one angel or two angels or?
You understand what I'm saying?
Because those things are in the periphery. They are actually looking for their master.
Master. So, it is quite likely that in the first instance, the woman who saw only one angel. And with that she might have been terrified. And then later on, when they went back, because Bible records of their visits several times actually that day.
Yes.
The woman was told to go and tell the disciples come running, and then John and Peter come, one of them overtakes the other, one goes first, then the other goes.
Why then maybe another angel came?
Well, in the first instance itself, there must have been two angels, but the first women or the woman who saw, once she saw one angel, she was already frightened,
Yes,
and
she
she would not have actually
seen
looked
anything
around to
else.
see the other angel.
Right.
So, there is actually no contradiction.
Because there must have been two angels, but one spoke to her, so she looked at that angel.
That's right.
Right.
And on another trip, on the same day after a little later, she would have seen two angels.
Right.
No, two includes one. If one gospel says only one angel was there, and if another gospel says there were two angels, then there is a contradiction. But here,
It
that's not
doesn't
what we
say
read.
only one.
Ah.
It just says the angel was there.
There. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
And two, inclusive of one. So there's no
Right.
contradiction actually.
Exactly. In Exodus 20, verse 5, God says that He punishes the children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate Him. But in Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 20, it says that the child will not share the guilt of the parent, nor will the parent share the guilt of the child. Now, which one of them is true, or is there a contradiction?
Well, there appears to be a contradiction, but again, if you study the Bible and biblical theology carefully, you will realize that there are different kinds of sin.
Yes.
One is called the original sin that the first humans committed. And we have inherited the sin nature
Right.
because that affected their nature and they became sinful.
Right.
So, as sinful parents, when they had children, the children were born as sinful.
Right.
So, there is original sin, then inherited sin.
Right.
And then, because we have inherited that sin nature, we commit our own sinful acts.
Right.
So, when it says God will not hold the father accountable for the son's sin and the son accountable to the father's sin, what the Bible is referring to is actually the personal sinful acts. So,
Yes.
if I commit a sin, God holds me guilty of
Yes.
that sin.
If you murder somebody, your son will not be held responsible for
Held
that.
responsible.
No.
But in the Exodus case, it is slightly different. When Adam sinned, where were you? Where was I?
Not yet born.
Not yet born, but we were in Adam's body and Eve's body.
Because we are their seed.
You see, their seed. So, Bible says, in Adam we also sinned already, because we were in them. See, my
That's
son
why we say we are born in sin.
in sin.
Inherited that sin
That's
nature.
in nature.
Right.
And some of the sins that we commit as parents, they have drastic effects on the children because they're already in us.
Right.
Now, for example, if a mother chooses to take drugs and all kinds of things while carrying a baby, the baby gets affected.
Right. And in all probability, that child will grow up to become a drug addict himself.
Or some genetic changes might come.
Yes.
And those genetic changes will not only go from this set of parents or this mother to the child, but from the child they might go to
The next
the
generation.
next generation. God is actually talking about those kinds of things, which if we do knowingly, God will allow the consequences to go down to the second generation, third generation, like that.
Yes. Now the next one is Genesis chapter 22 verse 1 in the KJV version. It says that God tempted Abraham. Here they are talking about the sacrifice of Isaac. Yet in James 1:13 it says that God does not tempt anyone. So how do you reconcile these two verses?
James is very clear in saying that God is neither tempted nor does he tempt anyone.
Yes.
And talking about temptation, James says, temptation comes either because of our sinful lusts or desires or because of Satan.
Yes.
And Satan tempts us because he wants us to
Fall.
fall. So the goal of a temptation is to trip us, to make us
Yes.
fall,
Right.
and to make us lose the blessings of God.
Yes.
And when God brings some test, it is testing or trying. That's why in James, there's a distinction made in the translations between the first kind, things that God does, and the second kind, things that Satan does.
So test
the
is
first
different
kind are
from
called
tempting.
tests or trials, and the second kind are called temptations.
Yes.
The goal of the test is not to make us fall and lose blessings. It is to strengthen us. It is to test and prove and approve our character,
Yes.
our faith,
Right.
and make it deeper and stronger. When God brought that into Abraham's life,
It was testing his
it
faith.
was testing his faith. And later on, if you read the Old Testament, Genesis 22, and Hebrews commentary on it that you find in chapter 11, particularly verses 4 to 21 or so, you will realize that Abraham actually came out in flying colors out of that test.
Right.
And because of his faith, Abraham is called friend of God and the father of the faithful.
Now the next question is from Galatians chapter 6 verse 2, which says that we must bear one another's burdens. Whereas in Galatians chapter 6, the same chapter, verse 5 says that every man should bear his own burden. So now whose burden do you have to bear? Your own or your brother's burden?
I think if we read verse number 4 right there, and also Philippians, where Paul says, everybody is concerned about their own troubles or problems. Nobody is concerned about the problems of others or the concerns of the kingdom. So the context overall is that when somebody sins, falls, and comes under the load of his sin, those of us who are standing should go and lift him up.
Okay.
And when we do that, he says, we should do that with full awareness that it may be me tomorrow.
Right.
So without any sense of arrogance or superiority, we will just
Or
identify
holier than thou
holier
attitude.
than thou attitude. We will help that brother and thus carry his burden.
Yes.
So that is the first reference. Then the second case is about somebody comparing himself and his actions with somebody else's actions, feeling proud or arrogant. There he says, don't compare yourself with anybody. You will be judged by God for your own actions.
Right.
So, mind your actions. Carry your load of doing good works.
Yes.
Because the good works that you need to do yourself, nobody can do for
Yes.
you, including God.
Right.
He'll only give you grace and strength. He'll only give me grace and strength to do the good we need to do.
Yes.
So, with this explanation now, we'll read 6:4. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently, but watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. You see, that's the context. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ, which is the law of love and grace. Then verse 3. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Each one should test his own actions. Then he can take pride in himself without comparing himself to someone else. Why?
Yes.
For each one should carry his own load.
So it says, for every man should carry his own load. So it is a continuation of verse 4.
That's right.
So this is what happens when we just take out one verse out of context, and then we find it's contradictory to something else because we lose the context.
That's true.
We all have to bear our own burdens and bear one another's burdens as well, because
That's
then
right.
we'll all be pulling together
That's
and
right.
it will be so much easier.
Yes.
Don't you think so?
Yes.
Yes. Now the next question is, why is John's gospel so different from the other three synoptic gospels? John mentions things that are not found in the other three, and the things that are in the other three, some of the things are not mentioned in John. Why?
The four Gospels are actually about the same person,
Right.
Jesus Christ.
Yes.
His birth, his life, his death, his resurrection, and very importantly,
His teachings.
his works and words.
Yes.
Now, each one of the Gospels was written from a different angle or perspective, addressing a particular kind of people,
Right.
like Gentiles or Jews, and things like that.
Yes.
And also, the first three, which are called synoptic Gospels, are somewhat similar in their structure, because they were all written quite close to the time of the happenings or the incidents. So they basically narrated things as they happened. Whereas John, being the youngest who lived longest, and the only one who actually was not crucified or killed for being a Christian, lived longer. And he lived to the end of his life.
Yes.
So he had more time to reflect theologically
Yes.
and to receive more instruction from the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And so he wrote much after the other three Gospels were written. And so he actually writes more of a theological reflection on who Jesus was and what his teachings were than on just a chronological narration of his doings and teachings as
Miracles.
they happened.
Because those things were already there.
There.
So he found that
Yeah.
this is maybe what is necessary.
That's
and
right.
to the people that he wrote, the Gentiles.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I think that was a very interesting and very enlightening episode. Thank you so much, Reverend Sudhakar. You have really cleared up many of the doubts that our viewers have got. It has been really so encouraging. I'm so glad that these misunderstandings are cleared up and these alleged contradictions are not contradictions at all.
Absolutely.
They need not baffle us anymore.
Anymore.
Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you.
Friends, do you get these kind of doubts sometimes? Instead of getting agitated or irritated, confused, or even pushing these things under the carpet, do some searching. Ask people who have done research to explain it to you. Pray and ask God for wisdom and understanding. James 1:5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. God bless you.
I am so relieved. With a little bit of research, all these so-called contradictions can be explained and cleared up. Knowing a little bit of the background will help us to understand these things. If you found this episode useful, or if you have some doubts, write to us at writetoprobe@gmail.com. I must bid farewell to you now, but I will be back next week. Till then, goodbye and God bless.
You've got to probe.
Is the Bible against science?
If somebody asks me what is the age of the earth, I can say, I can't tell you because I wasn't there at that time.
We are latecomers. The universe came first.
What was the source of light on day 1, 2 and 3?
Many Bible-believing, sincere Christians in the UK and Europe take this view of theistic evolution.
If creation is true, then there is a creator to whom we are accountable.
You got to